I'm Drew,
I'm Stephanie.
and welcome to the second episode now of the Young Americans podcast. And so, I think we're going to start off with we've been talking a lot about how it's been a year basically since all this COVID stuff started. I don't know you remember that we went back for spring break last year, and then we never came back for spring break. First, it was like a 2 week delay, and then they said, we don't know, and then here we are. So, yeah, it's been 1 year.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year. Actually, last year around this time, I had actually flown the most that I've ever flown, even though everyone was like telling people to stop flying. So that was great.
Yeah, flying was really cool at first, like because we had to go down to LA to get move all our stuff out, and like there was no one on the planes. The airports were empty. It was it was kind of nice to travel with literally nobody. But yeah, like I think things are kind of getting back to normal in terms of travel. Like traffic's kind of back to normal at least where we are. Air travel, I think things are kind of starting to get back to where they were, but obviously not as much.
Right.
And then so like with the whole like kind of COVID everything, I know like LMU, our school, we're planning to reopen in the fall. Do you think they're going to stick to that one? Because like everything's up in the air these days. Like I'm optimistic about it, but what do you think? Is that actually going to open in the fall?
I think LMU wants to open and has every intention to open. I'm a senior, so it's like it doesn't really matter to me, but
Hmm.
it'd be nice to come back. I think it's very dependent on California as the state because LMU has to follow the regulations and mandates of California. So as long as California keeps opening, then I have hopes that you guys will open in the fall for sure.
Yeah, that's what I definitely think. Because I know like in a lot of their kind of press releases or the newsletters, they always say, "Oh, where you have to like." We're fully ready to open. We want to do X, Y, Z, but we have to follow like the LA County guidelines. I think the biggest thing in LA counties is a mess and it's been a mess for a while. So they'll get there eventually. But yeah, like things are actually starting to open up. Like I think I saw that restaurants are going to be opening up like on Wednesday, sometime soon. They're going to be opening up. So LA County's getting there. They're definitely starting that reopening kind of process. So yeah, I think we're hopefully on track to get back to normal.
And like with all of the current reopenings that LMU is allowing with spaces like the library and like for CFA students, the like dance studios and all of that, I think there's like high hopes for definitely reopening.
I think so. Yeah, and then I guess just kind of broader, like on a larger scale, how do you think the country like? Because there's been a lot of talk about how Texas and Florida and Mississippi, they've all either repealed or are now repealing their mask mandates and all that kind of restrictions. And so, what do you think like the general plan for reopening should be? Should it be like kind of the Texas, Florida, Mississippi route where it's just you do your own thing, you wear a mask if you want to, we're not doing any more lockdowns, no more mask mandates, or do you think it should be like a more gradual opening up, or do you think it should be like LA County where we just never open up?
I definitely don't think we should be like LA County. I actually really liked what Texas and Florida are doing. Um, it's honestly just a matter of freedom. Like if people want to stay home, if they want to wear masks, then they can go ahead and do that. Just because the whole state is opening up doesn't prevent you from protecting yourself if you so choose. So I think it's actually a really good thing because businesses can open up, people can start, economically recovering from this whole year of being in quarantine, and it's about time. Like honestly, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that it's totally fine if you want just like a choice or like you have your own personal freedom to say like, do you want to wear a mask or not? Because like Texas like didn't ban masks. They said if you don't want to wear one, don't wear one. If you want to wear one. It's up to you. And I think that's a fine way of going about handling it. Like if you're at risk or your immediate family's at risk or you're just personally not very comfortable, then you can wear a mask. It's totally fine. Like it's not outlawed. Like you can still do whatever you want. It's just that the government's no longer going to force you to do it. And like I know we're both pretty big fans of limited government and your own personal freedom, so like I don't really have a huge issue with that. Like I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, "Oh, like you can't trust people to make the responsible choices." Like, well, yeah, but like you have to give them the freedom to not make responsible choices. Like that's like I don't know if I'd say that's a double edged sword of freedom, but it's like you have the freedom to make bad choices. Like if you're like at high risk for COVID and you go into a really crowded place without a mask, like that's your choice. Like you're putting yourself at risk there.
I completely agree. And I feel like it's better if we all open up because, especially with mental health and like isolation of younger students, I know in Las Vegas alone, about like 20 students have committed suicide from being quarantined. And I think that opening up completely, or at least mostly for most of the states, would be really good, especially in terms of socialization and like just kind of getting back into society.
Yeah, I definitely think there's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm sure they'll come out in the years talking about all like the mental health issues and the relationships breaking down and like family issues and like all this stuff's going to kind of blow up. And I'm sure that once this all dies down, there's going to be a lot more like studies or reports or investigations on that because I think that yeah, things are really tough for a lot of people. Luckily, like I've been fine. Like I'm doing all right. My mental health's good. My family's good. All that. But I know there's a lot of people out there who aren't in the best family situations or are really having issues with like the whole social aspect, not being able to see their friends or family or anyone else. And so I totally get that. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are much worse off than I am through all this, and I hope you're doing okay too. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I think I was really lucky when I came back because I was able to have a job and like things were actually like pretty decently open compared to being back at school. But it's tough on everyone in their own ways. So,
Mm-hmm. And so then, kind of like what we were mentioning a little bit earlier, it's so we were saying that you have the like you should have the freedom to wear a mask if you want to. If you don't want to, it's your own personal choice. And so then, aside from not like legally speaking, but like what do you think would be a smart or responsible thing to do? Like, do you think that it'd be smart or responsible to wear your mask at all times, like in the stores and outdoors, or do you think that it's fine if you're like not wearing it like in certain situations? Like, what do you think's the responsible way about going? Not like legal, like you wouldn't make this a law, but what would your recommendation be? I guess.
oh. Honestly, my recommendation would be to just generally not live in fear. Like, we have immune systems for a reason. And yes, there are immunocompromised or elderly that do need to be protected, like especially with the vaccine or masks or staying at home. But a lot of majority of us are healthy, so I feel like it just comes down to really freedom. And I don't know. I feel like there's just a lot of inconsistency with masks, and like you can sit in a restaurant and take off your mask, but as soon as you get up and walk, like you have to put on a mask, but you're in the same general vicinity. So I think if there was more consistency, I'd be like more open to like mandates or whatever, even though I'm like pro limited government. Um, but yeah, there's no studies that show whether masks work, double masks nowadays work or not. So yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely think that like I've always been a fan of just if you need to wear a mask, if your immediate family's compromised, if you have some health issues, then you take care of that. Like, you can isolate yourself, you can kind of go into lockdown, you can wear masks. Like I think it definitely wouldn't be responsible if like either you had some serious health issues and you were going to like hang out with like people at a party without like a mask or anything, or if you were had like if you were living with like a really elderly like grandparent and they had a lot of health issues and you were going out doing your regular all your regular stuff. Like I think that's not exactly responsible because, like for instance, a lot of my friends we've been still hanging out during this whole COVID thing. Not as much as the start, but like especially now we're just kind of hanging out as usual. But one of our friends, like he didn't come to like a lot of our get-togethers because his mom, I think it was, had like some serious health concerns, and I don't know exactly what it was. All I know is that she was like one of the high risk kind of tiers, and so he just didn't come to our get-togethers. That's totally fine. Like he couldn't come because he had an immediate family that was at risk for it, so he couldn't risk catching it, and so he just didn't come. And like that's totally fine. Like me and all my friends, like we're young and healthy. We don't have any issues. Our families are all pretty relatively young and healthy. And we don't have any issues, and so we can just hang out responsibly. We'll just hang out with our group. We don't go out like to all these like other places. Just us hanging out. We know we're pretty sure none of us have COVID. Like a lot of us have had COVID tests, and so we think we're fine. We're okay to take that risk. Like that's it's a risk we're willing to take, I guess. Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely agree. Like, that's amazing that you guys still get to hang out in the midst of all this. I think it's just interesting because people forget that people are also sanitizing more than usual nowadays. So places are actually a lot cleaner than they would be pre COVID. And so that just kind of like the distinction is just kind of really interesting in how like masks and social distancing plus all this cleaning, like what works, what doesn't, is like the thing that everyone needs to figure out.
Yeah, kind of speaking on that, it's my dad actually works in like HVAC, so like air conditioning, heating, and cooling, and all that. And his company's been getting a lot of like panicked people over like, oh, we need to like update our HVAC, we need to install these filters, and like my dad's like, he's been kind of annoyed by it because it's almost like he knows that like COVID air transmission through ventilation, like the school vent, like how like one of the reasons that people aren't going to want schools open is because they say all these older schools have old ventilation systems and it's going to like foster COVID but like he's been like kind of saying he's been kind of like annoyed by is that that's not really the main issue. Like it's not like you're going to go into a building but there's poor old ventilation and therefore you're going to catch COVID. Like that's not where COVID's coming from. It's not spreading through the air vents and through all the air ducts. And like installing all these like new fancy filters isn't really going to cut back on anything. So I agree that yeah, like everything like there's so many precautions in place that a lot of them probably aren't even that necessary. Like I thought, like maybe it was just me, but I thought a while ago they came up with a thing saying that like actually COVID doesn't highly transmit through surfaces at all. Like it doesn't really transmit through touch, and then like some places like dunk their pens in hand sanitizer and some don't, and so like it. I don't know what the whole touching transmission thing is. I thought for a while it was a big thing, and then it wasn't, and then maybe it is now again. I don't really know where because everything changes constantly. There's no, like you said, there's very little consistency. So
Yes.
and then kind of like with the consistency thing. I think my biggest frustration with all this has been is just like how arbitrary everything seems. Like they'll be like, oh, like we're limiting tables to like 5 family members. Like why five? Like what if you have a family of 6? Like why is the cutoff at 5? Or like why is this the cutoff for this? Or why can we only have like 3 people here? Or why do we have to like? There seems to be a lot of arbitrary rules that don't make any sense, and that like, oh, you can do this but not this because of this, and like it doesn't seem to make much sense. There's no like solid like through line. It's just we're putting in a regulation because like there doesn't seem to be much of a line of reasoning through all these, and a lot of it just seems to be arbitrary. This is just how it is.
Yeah, I think it was weird because at the beginning of COVID last year, it was like 3 feet of social distancing. Then it was 4 feet, then 5 feet. Like, who came up with 6 feet? Because technically, what I learned, like, when you sneeze without masks, it goes 10 feet. So, like where does 6 feet come from? And then, like, I thought it was really interesting because I was taking a walk the other day and people were wearing masks outside, which is like the worst place to wear them because you're just breathing in your own air versus like getting fresh air in like a neighborhood. It's not like you're in front of people or around people. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, the mask outside. I don't wear a mask outside, but I always feel weird going by people who do because I feel like they think like I'm a bad person for not wearing a mask. Like I feel socially weird not wearing a mask outside when I go by other people, but I personally don't. But then like especially like I'm sure with the 6 feet thing, I don't know. Like there's I'm sure someone out there has some science behind it, but yeah, like it seems like a kind of arbitrary number. Like why not 7? Why not 8? Why not 5? Like just why not go farther? I don't know. Like why does that have to be 6? Why not make it 10? Like just keep going. But I think like especially one of the weirdest things is at restaurants where you have to wear the mask coming in, then you sit down, you can take off the mask, and you're totally fine. You have to put it on until you get up and leave. It's like I get kind of the reasoning behind that, but you realize how that basically makes it useless. Like if you're going to be sitting down eating without your mask on, talking and doing all that stuff, why do you have to put it on to walk in? Like, are you really going to transmit COVID to somebody walking from the entrance to your table, but not while you're sitting at your table? And like, I think that's like a rather arbitrary kind of rule where it's just like they want you to put on possibly for like virtue signaling or just to look good or just to like kind of act like they're doing something or just because they don't know what they want to do. But it's rules like that where it's just really kind of silly where you can get in trouble if you're walking around the restaurant without a mask, but if you're sitting down, it's totally fine. I don't know. It's that's especially the thing that seems really arbitrary to me.
Yes, definitely. And then like the types of masks. So at first it was like the N95 is the only effective one, but then now it's like all masks. But also there's different like cloth masks. There's like people who use t-shirts, like mesh masks that like are practically see-through. So it's like how do you figure out what masks actually work versus like just putting on a face covering over your face just for the heck of it? Like so.
Yeah, the masks have changed a lot. I know it's because there's a lot of like changing like science and whatnot. I know at first like we all know like at first they're like, oh no, don't wear a mask, you don't need to. And then it was, well, you should wear a mask but don't because the emergency people need it. And then it was, oh well, you should wear a mask, and it's like, oh well, you have to wear this specific mask, no other masks do anything. Then it's, well, you can just wear anything over your mouth. And then it's always been changing back and forth, and I get that it's because we're in the middle of all this and there's all this new information and data and whatnot. But even like now that like I think we have everything kind of figured out, it's like they're still kind of just arbitrarily changing the rules where it's like, oh, like single mask, double mask, triple mask, like stuff like that. Where also it seems kind of weird where if you say like, oh, you need to wear 2 masks, and doesn't that kind of admit that one mask is not efficiently protecting you? Like, doesn't that defeat the purpose then of a mask if you're like, well, you have to wear 2 or 3 for it to actually be efficient? Well, so then why do you have to wear one if it's apparently not doing anything? So it's stuff like that where I feel like we just need to get our story straight. I feel like I'd be a lot less frustrated if we could just pick a rule and just stick with it and stop changing. And I know why it's changing, but a lot of times it just seems arbitrary. It doesn't seem to make much logical sense. It seems kind of pointless. And so I'd be much more happy or satisfied if we just picked a rule and stuck with it, and then we'll draw things back eventually.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And so then, kind of how this all started is like we all sort of just flatten the curve, and now here we are 1 year later, still apparently trying to flatten. No one said flatten the curve in like long, like 10 months. I don't even know. It's been forever since anyone ever mentioned flatten the curve because yeah, that was the original promise. 2 weeks, the world will be over by Christmas kind of thing. But now we're here. So, like, what do you think that the original goal should have been? Like, with all this lockdown and masks and stuff, should the goal have been to flatten the curve? Should the goal have been to just stop COVID entirely, which seems to be the goal now? Was it just to hold out until we get a vaccine? Was it just to not overload the hospital system? Was it to stop all the deaths or just stop transmissions? Or like, what do you think the goal should have been? Not what it is, like what should our goal have been to mitigate this?
Oh, that's a hard question. It's really hard because you can't stop COVID. Like it's like the flu. Well, except for this year where the flu is basically non-existent. But like
I wonder why.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you can't stop that. And vaccines take forever to like fully develop and fully research. Like yes, we have vaccines, but like they're less effective than your own immune system. So it's not, or at least some studies show that. So it's just really complicated with like the whole, and then the hospital system. It's it's not all COVID. I mean, I know that New York had it really bad. So like I feel like certain states should have been like that should have been their goal. Um but I think honestly it's just like sanitary, like to be sanitary. It's just encouraging um people to just live healthier lifestyles and like actually wash their hands when they walk out of the bathroom. It's really that simple. It's like those small steps can actually help prevent diseases and like illnesses and help strengthen your immune system that you already have.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I feel like, at least I knock on wood, I guess, but I feel like my immune system's pretty strong, and like I feel pretty good about it. But especially just like with younger people, I think that, like in my opinion, I don't really like I care about how many cases there are, but at the end of the day, cases are pretty irrelevant to me. I care about if people are dying from those cases and if the hospitals are overloaded because that means that if somebody gets sick who could have been saved and they don't have a hospital room or they don't have the equipment, all that stuff, that they might die. But I think that at the end of the day, cases matter very little because if like a million people get COVID but none of those people die, so what? Like, yeah, you had a million cases but no one died. But the problem is if you have a million cases and like 200,000 die, then it's like, okay, now like we need to avoid these deaths. And so I think that yeah, the goal should be to just make sure that our like I was saying is that if everyone does their own personal thing, like locked in if you need to, quarantine if you need to, wear masks, do all the precautions if you need to. But if you don't, like if you're healthy like me or like a lot of my friends or family, like I would probably I'm not gonna say I'm 100%. I'm not saying I would be guaranteed fine, but I would most likely be fine. I would have a very very high chance of being okay and surviving if I got COVID. And so, like, if I get it, yeah, I'm another statistic, like I'm another case number. But I'm as long as I am not like taking up hospital, like if the hospitals are filled to capacity and all these people are coming in that probably are going to survive, I think that the biggest thing is just making sure the hospitals don't overflow so that we don't have more deaths because there's a lot of preventable deaths from COVID if they get the right treatment. And I think like especially what happened in Italy is that the hospital system got overwhelmed and that's why they got hit so hard. And so I think the biggest goal should have been to not overload the hospital system. And then if everyone did their own responsible personal choices, that would kind of mitigate deaths on its own. And yes, we probably would have had a lot of cases, but after that initial big spike, we would kind of start to like flatten out. And yes, there's going to be more spikes, and it's going to keep coming up in certain seasons. But as long as the death tolls are either staying level or hopefully going down, they should be going down. I think that's ideal. As long as the hospitals aren't overflowed, the deaths are going down. I don't really care where the cases are at. I care where the deaths are at, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting because last year especially there was a lot of like COVID counters, but like now you don't really see much of that anymore. Um, and not sure if that's like a political thing or just a mainstream media thing. But it's just kind of interesting because if you look at the statistics, California, which had like all the mandates and like shut the state down and kind of is relatively still shut down compared to a lot of states today, compared to like a state like Florida or South Dakota where masks weren't necessarily mandated the entire year, like the cases were about the same. And if not, California had more cases. So I do agree with the hospital system. I think that's important. But I also think that scientists or like anyone doing like research on medicine should look up medicative like preventative measures because like vaccines aren't gonna be available to everyone at every single time, even though like we just purchased a whole bunch of vaccines. I feel like there's just like simple things like vitamins, like take your vitamins, be healthy. Um, I don't know, do more studies on medicine that like can be accessible by a lot of people. And I feel like that would save and prevent a lot of COVID cases from happening in the first place.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Like I think, like as we all know, like especially one of the big things that puts you at risk for COVID is age and like underlying conditions. And like I've taken a nutrition class, and yeah, like there's a lot of underlying conditions that can be avoidable with like proper nutrition and proper like exercise and just taking care of your body. And so yeah, like I think that, like I think it's a bit late now to start all that. Like it's kind of a bit late to now like, oh, like now I'm gonna get my diet in shape and like do all that and I'll be safe from COVID. Like it's a bit late to start in the middle of a pandemic, but like I think that going forward, yeah, one of the best ways to prevent these kinds of like mass outbreaks and all these deaths is to like just have like people like take care of their bodies, get the proper nutrients they need, like take care of themselves, and just have better personal health. And I think that will alone seriously cut back on any future. But hopefully, we don't have another pandemic anytime soon. But if we do, I think that would seriously cut back on deaths if it's anything like COVID.
What, you don't want to be a part of history again? Like,
Not for a little while. I'll wait like another like 50 years or so. Then maybe we'll change things up a bit.
I agree. I definitely want to be in retirement by then.
Yeah,
You
well, actually, then we'll be the ones at risk then. So
know.
maybe not a
That's true.
pandemic, but something else. And yeah.
Yeah.
And so then, with all this COVID stuff, like you mentioned, like the COVID trackers and like all that, like I don't know about you, but I feel like especially nowadays, one of like the big word of the year, couple years, decade, however long has been just like fear mongering, and I feel that there's a lot of fear mongering going around, like the media and politicians and people on social media and movies and TV shows and documentaries, like everything's the end of the world. Like COVID's going to kill literally everyone. Climate change is going to destroy the planet by 2012. The Capitol riots are going to overthrow our democracy. And it's going to be the end of America. And World War III is going to happen with Iran because for some reason a bunch of people would want to fight over Iran. Like there's all this stuff where it's everything is the end of the world basically. Like every incident, anything that comes up is the worst thing to ever happen. It's the biggest threat to our democracy. It's the greatest threat to humanity. It's the end of the world. It's going to kill everyone. Like everything these days seems hyper like dangerous, and I think that's mostly just because there's so much fear mongering. Like everyone panics on social media. The news freaks out about it. Like I don't know. Have you noticed that, or is it just me?
I've definitely noticed that. And it's not just on one side, it's literally on both sides. Like, I feel like Hollywood is like perpetuating this as well, just kind of like making movies about the end of the world that's a little too like relatable. Um, but I don't know. I feel like people just want explanations for things that they don't understand or aren't able to comprehend like in their real world time. So like the only other excuse is like a conspiracy theory or like a, another like situation that might not even happen. And I feel like it's just a way to draw attention partially and also like people might believe it. Like there are people that actually believe these things. I mean, there's people that are prepared for the apocalypse, which I mean, if you're religious, who knows when that is, you know? So I don't know. It's a really hard question, but I do notice that there's a lot of like fear mongering for sure. What about you?
Well, yeah, definitely. There's like a ton of it. I've noticed, especially like totally with COVID. Like everyone acts like COVID's going to be like could be the end of humanity. And it's going to kill like literally billions of people, and it's not. Like there's so many people who, especially on social media, were like freaking out. With like, oh, if you go to like a party or if you go to like the movie theaters when they're opening up or this or that, you will die. Like you'll get a deadly disease and get killed. It's like, well, most of us will not. Like statistically speaking, most of us will not die. Like, yes, there will be deaths. There people will die. Like, if they do these certain things, there will be people who don't make it through this. But not everyone's gonna die. Most of us are gonna make it through this. The country will be okay. The planet will be okay. We're gonna be okay. And I don't want to sound like I'm like almost like acting like, oh, like nothing can touch us, like we're never gonna like collapse. It's like the planet could very well end. I don't know, but like COVID's not gonna be the thing that kills us. The whole like Iran thing wasn't gonna start World War III. Maybe a war, not World War III. The Capitol riots are not gonna be the end of democracy. The country's not gonna tear apart at the seams. There's not gonna be a civil war. Like it's all that stuff where like I feel like especially nowadays everyone feels like we're on the verge of a civil war. Like we're one day away from like everything just falling apart and breaking out into like open conflict. And I don't know, like I don't think people are at that level yet where they're actually going to take up arms against everyone. Like there's very loud vocal people on both sides, and there's a lot of like distrust and animosity between sides of the aisle and people, but I think at the end of the day people are going to get along and they're not going to actually fight the other side, like take up arms and like try and take control of the country. I don't think something like that's going to happen. Like we've still got a few steps to go, I think, before we reach civil war territory.
Definitely. And I I feel like it's hard because there's like social media, which exaggerates like everything. It doesn't matter who you're around or like the surroundings or people you follow, even celebrities, like they post one thing, but then you go outside, take a walk, or like go to the store, and like you're experiencing something completely different, which is might be the opposite of what you're seeing on social media. Like people aren't that stressed about a new president, for example, or like the next world war. Like people aren't actively thinking about that on like a daily basis, especially those that aren't really that into politics. So I feel like it's really interesting kind of seeing like the social media world where everyone posts their opinions and like they're free to post them, or like general conversations with just people like your neighbors.
Yeah, like I think when you really get out into the world and yeah, you just talk to people like your neighbors or your friends or just people around like at the grocery store or whatever, you realize that people really aren't that afraid. Like I think it is all just social media and the news and politicians and all that. Like it's just all this stuff to rile you up. And like when you go to the store, not everyone there is like deathly afraid of COVID and they all think they're about to die, or nobody there thinks that like nobody's out there preparing for a civil war. Like if people actually think there's a civil war, no one's doing anything really to prepare for it aside from like the far fringe groups. But like people aren't really that afraid. Like nobody talks about all this stuff. Like nobody, we don't go to like the store and you don't talk about how like, oh, you're so afraid that like the world's gonna come to an end and like you're preparing for like the end times, like the climate to collapse. And you're not talking about how like, oh, like COVID's gonna get us all and like we gotta hunker down. Like no, I don't think a lot of people actually genuinely believe that. Like I think that it's a lot of sensationalism, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people they're okay. Like they're feeling fine. They don't think it's the end of the world. And yeah, I think it's just kind of the fear and the paranoia is like hyped up by all this social media, politicians, all that. But then I guess like why do you think that is? Like for instance, do you think the media actually thinks all this stuff is like the end of the world, and do you think all these politicians really believe that like this is like all this stuff is like a major catastrophe? And do you think that they all like genuinely believe this, or do you think like the news just wants it for clicks, or do you think politicians are doing it for some kind of like cynical like power, like they want more control? Like why do you think all this is? Do you think people actually believe this, or do you think there's more like ulterior motives or some kind of something else behind it?
Well, that's kind of like a loaded question. So I'll just start with the media. Um, if you watch Project Veritas
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube or like I don't know where else they are, like
Yeah.
Facebook or other social media platforms, I know that they've done like a few undercovers with CNN and all like other news networks, and it shows that like news networks, regardless of how unbiased they claim to be, like it could be Fox News, it could be CNN, could be like other news stations. Those are the main ones I can think of. They draw their own narratives. They write their own narratives that draw viewers in and draw attention. Their point is to like not just like not necessarily entertain, but kind of just like have people listen to them. And it's just really interesting because I do think it's a lot of sensationalism. It's a lot of like dramatizing reality so that people are interested or invested in the narrative that they want to depict. As for politician and political figures, I mean, it really depends.
Yeah,
Like in California with like the whole governor, like even in Nevada, like I feel like politicians do want more power and COVID just gave them the reason to have more power. And I feel like just generally they dramatize or they create some sort of like theory so that people look up to these people with higher power and like especially because like these politicians have like special clearances and things that we don't know. So like who knows what to believe nowadays because people can actually say whatever they want and you wouldn't actually know if it's true or not until you get those same clearances.
yeah, totally. Like, I think yeah, you kind of do have to take things by case basis, and I'm sure that yeah, all the news like I'm not just saying this of like I'm not just saying oh the left wing media like no I'm sure all media they like to hype things up because I know like there's a lot of stuff where they want to get more clicks and they want people to come to their websites or watch their programs and whatnot, and I'm sure some people do genuinely believe like I'm sure some of the anchors or like the writers like do genuinely believe like this is the worst thing to ever happen, but I think like as a whole I don't think like the entire news networks are really this paranoid panicking. I think that yeah, they just like to make their narratives they like because people come there for that. Like for instance, like all like the people who like hate Trump would go to CNN, all the people who like hate Biden would go to Fox News, and like that they have their narratives. They're definitely going to like skew things a certain way, make things seem much worse or better depending on if it suits that kind of slant, and that's just kind of how it goes. And then for the politicians, yeah, like you were saying, there are probably some who are definitely in it for like more kind of power grabs, more like shoving stuff through, like shoving things into stimulus bills, for instance, perhaps, or stuff like that. And so I'm sure there's a lot of that that goes on. I'm sure there's other politicians who do genuinely think that like we need to act now, or the country's going to fall apart and the planet's going to blow up and stuff like that. So it's kind of hard to say, but there are some instances where it's like I don't, did you ever hear about this? There's going to be the like QAnon inauguration day on March 4th or whatever.
Oh, I did hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, apparently there was going to be a second massive Capitol riot assault on March 4th, and that never happened. It was no one showed up. There was literally literally no one there, but all the troops were there. The fence is still up around the Capitol. Like the Capitol's very militarized right now, and I don't think that's a very good thing. Like if you actually want to talk about civil wars, there's been quite a few about having troops stationed in the Capitol, but like I don't know. I don't think it's a good thing for the country to have this like very militarized capital with like all the fences and the troops and like having all these active soldiers there. And I get the point. Like I get that. Yeah, after the Capitol riots, they needed to calm things down, come in, establish the order. But like then when there's stuff where they say like, oh, on March 4th there's going to be this massive attack and like they're going to come back at the Capitol and it's going to like break out into violence, and then that doesn't happen. You start to wonder like did you actually think that was going to happen, or were you stirring up like a conspiracy theory so that you could keep soldiers in the Capitol and like keep this like all this fence up and all these precautionary measures, and or just drive fear? Like, do you want people to be afraid? Like, because I think it is like a very kind of scary or like disheartening image to see like all the barbed wire around the Capitol and like armed soldiers like patrolling. Like that's not a good image, and I don't know if that's. I certainly hope it's not intentional. Like I hope that there's not people who are like, we need to keep the troops there as long as we can. We need to keep this fence up as long as we can because we want people to be afraid. We want them to like be fearful because like that would be an effective tactic. I just hope that that's not intentional. I hope that's just like a side effect. But I don't know. Like there could be some cynical people out there who are stirring up these conspiracy theories intentionally to like hold on to that power that they've been given in these emergency times because COVID's given a lot of political figures a lot more power, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I'm just saying that it would be very tempting to hold on to that power. Like when you have all this power, it's you people don't give up power as easily as they're given it, and so I'd be concerned. Like the longer this goes on, the more skeptical it is of why like all these restrictions and all this power and all this control are still in place because that's the less and less it's needed, the less and the harder it is to justify why they have all these powers and abilities that they shouldn't normally have.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, it's kind of funny regarding politicians and their power because they actually are public servants. They're considered public servants.
Hmm.
So they work for the people. Yet a lot of times, like they'll work for money or like other different reasons, like on both sides. Like it's not even just like a one-sided thing. Especially career politicians. Oh my gosh. Like that's like a whole other topic that could be explained for like hours.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy because I honestly think with like the barriers, I really think someone in their basement created like a theory. And like while some people do believe it, like this person's probably getting a kick out of the fact that it's like impacting like the whole nation.
Hmm. That's why I kind of wonder that too, like how much of it is just like people online trying to just like poke the whole like conspiracy fire flames and just see like yeah, how much of a reaction they can get out of people. Like yeah, like there are probably all these people. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying like maybe this is true. Like there's all these people online who are like, oh yeah, we're there's gonna be a massive storming of the Capitol on March 4th. They're gonna like get Trump inaugurated again, and it's gonna like overthrow the like democracy. Like I wonder if they did that just to see like if they'll take the bait because I'm sure there's tons of people out there who like spew out all these like fake claims or these like false conspiracy theories or like just blatant lies to try and see like if they can get the media to catch on because the media have like a very like especially the media have a long track record of not understanding the internet very well and so they'll latch onto things and they'll like freak out over like what someone said in like some random chat room and like they don't understand even what the internet is and so I think there might be a lot of that like intentional kind of like prodding at the media to see like kind of what they'll bite at and see if they can like kind of trick them to like just kind of see like how gullible they really are. And so like I like again like I don't want to say that yeah like everyone's like it's some malicious conspiracy to keep troops in the capital and like enforce martial law. Like I think that it could very well just be they're overreacting to like what some random trolls on the internet are trying to do. Like I don't know. Like it could be that it could have been a serious thing. I don't know. But at the end of the day, nothing materialized, and so that's when you have to start wondering like is this that's when you just have to start asking questions about where this all came from and why this is happening.
Right. Yeah, the capital situation is really interesting.
Yeah, it's we're not going to hear the end of that for a while, and I agree that that was a really bad thing. Like I'm not supporting that at all. I want to make that clear. That was a really bad incident, but this is going to be something where it never goes away. It's going to be kind of like I don't want to say it's going to be kind of like COVID, but it's going to linger for a long, long time. Like I'm afraid what could happen is it's going to be like an excuse to almost like clamp down a lot on like for instance like troops in the capital or like increased security or like more kind of like control to the government in order to be like oh well we need to protect the capital and protect our democracy so they enforce all these like stricter like security like power protocols and like well it could be I'm not saying it's going to go that way, but it could go that way, and I'm concerned that people could use the Capitol riots as like almost like an excuse to grab more power, grab more control, enact more laws and security, and like I'm concerned of what could come from like the fallout of that. Like not just I'm not necessarily concerned about like I didn't think they were actually going to overthrow democracy. Like I don't think if they had just fully taken over the Capitol building, I don't think America would have ended there. I don't think they were going to create a new government and like launch an insurrection, but I'm afraid of the fallout from that of what could come like in terms of like a reaction to that where everyone's like hyper like over not like overprotective, but I don't know if you can think of the right word, but almost like going too far to like make sure something like that doesn't happen. Like in order to protect democracy, we're gonna destroy democracy by enacting all these like laws to protect quote unquote. And so I'm concerned about like there being more like big governments, more totalitarian kind of things because they're trying to under the guise of protecting democracy because it sounds nice on paper, but you can do a lot of sketchy things in the name of protecting democracy, quote unquote. So I could be concerned about like some kind of fallout from that.
Definitely. I feel like something this, I'm not saying that the Capitol riots are small, because that was like a big deal and that was not good on either sides. Everyone like condemned it,
Yeah.
like said it was bad. So it's not, I feel like though, once that starts and then you start using that as an excuse, like you said, like it just does give them a reason to like gain more power, like have people reliant more on government rather than rely on themselves.
Yeah, like I guess kind of like to reiterate the point, I'm more afraid of like big government totalitarian control coming as a result of this rather than like a bunch of crazy nut jobs running into the Capitol doing whatever they I don't know what they thought they were going to do, but whatever they thought they were going to do. And so I'm more afraid of the fallout of it than the actual event because the actual event was it was definitely scary and it wasn't a good thing, but it was not gonna that was not like I don't think that was a serious major threat to democracy. I think the fallout from that could be a serious threat though, and so that's what I'm more concerned about.
definitely.
I guess just kind of bringing things back to more LMU specifically, just kind of moving on from like COVID and all the capital rights and all the end of the world kind of stuff. Is I know we talked about it a bit in our last podcast as well. Is just like left wing kind of bias or like stuff in academia. And I was just wondering if you like. I was thinking we could bring stuff up like if you've had any experiences like that at LMU because I know I've certainly had some, especially recently. And so I was wondering like any specific examples like because we could bring this in from like you or me or like any other like of our YAP members just if anyone has like a specific example of like this kind of left-wing bias on campus I don't know I'd like to hear it and kind of see what other people are experiencing because I know sometimes like especially people on the left will be like oh no you guys are just like you're it's a conspiracy like there's no like huge left-wing bias they're just doing this and so I don't know like do you have any instances of like left-wing bias or just like no yeah look like in my class we talked about this or the professor said this or the students did this or like anything like that.
Not so much this semester. Like this semester, I'm taking like a psych of relationships class and then a lot of dance classes. And they just really talk about gender and sex being different. And then like we have to introduce our pronouns. But like in my previous classes, we've talked about like I've had students bring up like that the reason something happens, like it could be any reason, but like they just make fun of it and they say that capitalism is the problem. And like the professors don't disagree, like they don't even like, and it's not even like a politically like related topic. So yeah, I get a lot of that. I've been trying to like put it out of my mind, like it's just kind of like in one ear go out the other kind of thing. Like you if you listen to left-wing stuff or like more liberal minded professors, you kind of just learn like how to listen and when to listen and to like what. And like yes, it's good to get educated on what other people think, but also there's just times when you just don't want to argue, you know. So not so much this semester. But how about you? Anything this semester?
Well, he has a couple things because I'm kind of similar to your situation where especially for my first 2 years I think I didn't really have that much like left wing bias because like I'll admit I came into college thinking like oh everything's gonna be super left wing and all the professors are gonna be like super like far left leaning like Antifa like oh they hate Trump and all this and then like when you actually get in there it's not nearly as bad as you think. I'm sure there are some classes at LMU or maybe even at other colleges that are really bad, but like I haven't had any like terrible classes. I've had definitely some that are pretty left leaning. Like I had like a world religions and ecology class, which was pretty significantly left leaning, very like focused on like pretty left leaning like environmental policy kind of stuff. But you know, like that's it wasn't like anything egregious. But then, especially like this semester, I've had well last semester and this semester I've had two classes that have had like an actual like unit and a discussion like whole topic on intersectionality, and I just found that weird because like I know about intersectionality, but like I'd never heard of it like come up in classes. But now like within the same year, I've had multiple classes that are they're also very weirdly similar too. Like a lot of my classes that aren't listed as like environmental seem to take an environmental turn for some reason, and I don't know why. Like they just a lot of my classes seem to just somehow make their way to being environmental, but they both mentioned like a whole section on intersectionality, and of course like I'm I'll see if you agree with it, but I'm not a fan of intersectionality. I'm guessing you're not. And like it seems weird that they're just teaching that like as a base fact like no, this is true. And they do teach it within the context of different forms of oppression. Like I know some people say like oh no, intersectionality it's not about oppression. It's just like different identities. But no, like in our classes the actual definition they gave was intersecting of different identities in the context and like of oppression, and so it's about oppression. So it's like is like this person is a black male and therefore they are oppressed because they are black, but this is a like um, lesbian Asian woman and therefore she is oppressed because she is a minority, but she's also a lesbian, and so like it's multiple layers of like oppression, and they teach that like just like not as like a theory but like as a fact like no this is how it is. And that I didn't argue it I don't argue it in class because like that's I don't one there's not been a good time to argue and also I'm just not a super argumentative person. Like I'm not going to put my foot down in the middle of class and say no you're wrong and debate there. So I don't know I think it's I I think that's kind of like more what I was expecting from college. Just like there's these things where I like if I was teaching a class and I wanted to talk about like a more conservative right leaning thing, I'd say, well, there's this theory. Like here's something I personally believe, but I'm not going to say this is fact. Like here's my slant on it. Here's what some people would say. but and then like maybe give some like counter stuff, and then just say like just kind of leave it open. But like these classes are teaching intersectionality as like this is how it is. This is fact. This is reality. And so I don't know. What were your thoughts on intersectionality and that kind of stuff?
I think wow, the word intersectionality. Um, it's really interesting because how do you account for the outliers?
Hmm.
Like you can't account for like successful CEOs that are people of color and like not straight, like not heterosexual. Like, and there are people out there that are CEOs that aren't like the typical white male, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so I'm not a fan of it. I like, I like, I don't know. It's like, it's
Yeah.
an interesting concept. Yeah, I feel like people shouldn't let that one theory or that one definition define them. And it's very, they forget about character. And like intersectionality is very focused on physical characteristics or like economic characteristics or whatnot, but they're not focused on character, hard work, and like how someone was raised, like their upbringing. And I feel like those 3 points are very much more important than the color of your skin or like your gender, your race, whatever.
Yeah. Like again, like I think it's just a very weird. I think because I say again because I think I touched on this in the last podcast is that it's a very like weird like kind of collectivist like you're not an individual mindset. Like it's I think that's like a bad thing. I don't know. I don't like I think a lot of people find it like really like empowering or inspiring to be like, oh, I'm all these different like all these different identities intersecting. But I don't know. I don't think that is empowering or like inspiring. I think that's very like kind of degrading almost. Where it's like, no, you're not Stephanie. You're like an Asian woman, or like I'm not Drew. I'm a white male. And so it's weird where it's like you're you're not you. You're these groups, and like it does. Yeah, like what you were saying is like the context like that you were raised in or your own individual character like isn't really important. Like it's not really taken into account. It's like just by the definition of intersectionality, like Barack Obama when he was president was somehow more oppressed and like worse off than like some random like poor guy living in the middle of Wyoming who could like barely make ends meet with like his like minimum wage job. And so it's stuff like that where it's like, well, yeah, you can have outliers like just even like generalizing. I don't know if I would fully agree with a lot of intersectionality because it's like, well, then who decides like, and then do you have to make like a weird like totem pole like what who's going to define like what like at what point is a group not oppressed and when are they oppressed and like how much oppression, what kind of oppression, and like I don't know, like it seems really weird to try and define this like who's defining is in like oh like you're a black male therefore you're experiencing this kind of oppression and you're a victim of these systems and stuff like that as opposed to like oh like I'm a white male therefore I'm benefiting from these systems. And I don't know, like then it seems to get kind of weird. Like then are we like structuring like other like races and groups above the others? Like I don't that seems to start to delve kind of more towards like racist kind of territory, and so that's why I get a bit concerned because like well now we're just like defining and classifying people based on their color of their skin or their sexual orientation. I thought we were supposed to not do that, but that it seems really contradictory to like it's supposedly anti-racist, but it's it seems more racist than a lot of other things. So I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this past MLK, there was a quote that I posted from MLK that said something along the lines of like, I hope that my children don't get judged on the color of the skin, more on their content of their character, something like that. I
Yeah, I
can't
know
say
that quote. Yeah.
specifically, but yeah, and I feel like I was telling my parents this a few years ago, actually. Like I think it was between freshman and sophomore year. There's obviously Asian American Student Services. There's LGBTSS and like like Black African Student Services and all of that on campus, which is great, especially for like people that are international students that aren't necessarily familiar with like, you know, school or like how the American school system works. And like that kind of support is nice, especially if you're growing up in like a traditional, more cultural like context. But I've never necessarily felt more hindered or like held back than what than being identified as an Asian American woman who's like a religious person also. I don't know. It's just really complicated because it like oppresses you more than it does lift you up. I mean, some people might feel lifted up by like finding people that are of similar backgrounds, which is like good, but also like you kind of need to expose yourself, or at least I like to expose myself to like multiple different like contexts and like learning about other people and their experiences and their upbringings. Like everyone's different, and like even my friends who are like mostly Asian, we all have different backgrounds as well. So we're not going to be the same person, even though we are of the same like race, ethnicity. So I don't know. The grouping is like not my favorite thing to like encourage, I guess, in a school system.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd say yeah, like not encouraging is probably the right word because I definitely get the whole like they like to feel like they're part of like a group. Like I get that kind of mentality. Like I totally understand that. And I don't think that that's like an inherently bad thing. Like you're like, oh, like I'm proud to be like a black woman. I'm not like, oh no, that's so terrible that you identify as a black woman. Like no, like it's totally fine if you want to like if you want to like enjoy that, you feel like good about being like part of some larger community or some specific group. But I think kind of what you're saying, yeah, is that like it's like exposing yourself to other things and like be like viewing like being treated and viewed as an individual. I think is more important than being viewed or treated as part of some group because of course there's a billion expectations exceptions to every single grouping and every single rule, and so like yeah, like I think it's very counterproductive to try and just like group everybody into these like labels and be like, oh, you're black male, you're white male, you're Asian woman. Like it seems counterproductive to me, and so yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
And kind of like bringing that, sorry, last thing, into
Mm-hmm.
the larger context, like for jobs, they ask you to like maybe identify yourself as like a particular race, gender, whatnot. And honestly, I'm not a fan of that either, because I want to earn the job because I earned it, not because I'm a minority in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what hinders a lot of like our education system and like just like generally life. Like I don't know, people are like feeling like they're owed something when they could just work hard and get the same thing. And I feel like that's the importance thing.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that because yeah, then you do get into some weird stuff like when you're labeling everyone with groups and it's like well then it's like oh well if your group is like owed something or if your group is not owed something then it's weird because like yeah you have a bunch of exceptions so it's like well yeah maybe this person in that group is like owed this quote unquote like they do deserve that but like maybe this other person's like totally fine like they're well off they're doing really well for themselves they're doing better than like other people and so it's like well yeah, like kind of I guess like going around like circling back it's just it's really you can't really just classify all these people lump them into the same groups. And so one more thing actually not about intersectionality but another class thing it is kind of a minor thing but I'm taking a history of Western theater class and like we've had a couple plays now where like there's like I don't know how to say like Marxist undertones, I guess you'd say, where that's kind of fun. Where it's like it's not like the play is like overtly Marxist, but like every time I look up the play just for like some like we'll see what some other people are like doing analysis or like some like themes or like stuff are. There's been a few ones where it's like oh like Marxist interpretations, like okay that's interesting. And then like there's one play where like I think they wrote like an epilogue afterwards where like one of the main characters became like a communist and like our professor was like yeah like that's so great for her and like is is that great for her to be a communist? I don't know, but so yeah, it's just that's kind of like a more minor thing because the class is overall nice, but there's some stuff like that where it's just like every now and then there's just a little bit of like Marxism under there. Like it's not even like it's not like it's me like like conspiracy right winger be like oh this is a Marxist thing like no like it's overtly Marxist like it says so in the textbooks and on like in the epilogues and like in the analyses like there it's not like hidden Marxism like it's just Marxism but granted these plays actually were written like around the time when like Karl Marx was first kind of starting to take off. So like I understand why there's probably some Marxist influences because those ideas were kind of prominent or on the rise at the time. So I understand that yeah, like there's going to be Marxist stuff in plays that were written around the time of Karl Marx. So that's just a kind of a little kind of minor thing. That's just a little bit of communism here and there.
That's so interesting.
But yeah, most of my classes have actually been pretty good. Like kind of like I was saying, like I've actually had one class where some of my philosophy classes have been really good because I feel like in the philosophy classes they actually encourage people like to argue both sides. Like I was in one class where there was a guy who was probably he was definitely left leaning, possibly communist. I think he was like kind of advocating for some kind of like socialist y kind of stuff at one point. It's hard to say because with philosophy you're not necessarily arguing for like socialism, you're arguing for like the philosophy behind socialism. So it's like you're you're not really arguing politics. You're arguing like a level deeper, which is kind of interesting and fun. But so like there's stuff like that where like we would actually like the people arguing like some very like kind of more left leaning socialisty kind of ideas, and like me and like maybe like some other people would be arguing some more like individualistic kind of ideas. Like we'd actually have like a good conversation. The professor wouldn't take sides at all, and he'd actually like kind of like not like prod back and forth, like question both sides, but like if like the like whenever you'd come up with something, he'd be like, okay, well, what if someone were to say blah 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 blah, and then he'd kind of wait to see what the class would say, and he'd do that for both sides, like so he'd always question both sides, and like we had a nice back and forth. So I feel like philosophy classes, at least the ones I've been, have been very like they've been like like what university classes are supposed to be, like an exchange of ideas and like challenging your beliefs and stuff like that, and like finding new things and like kind of openly talking about stuff and that, I don't know. It's been fun to see. Like I wasn't expecting stuff like that from my philosophy class, but yeah, like my classes in general have been too overtly left and like definitely not as bad as I think probably some other colleges or how it's portrayed like on social media and whatnot. But yeah, like I think like you said, your classes were mostly fine.
Yes, definitely. I think the philosophy thing is so interesting. I was going to say that's exactly what a college like classroom should sound like.
Yeah, I think a
But
lot of
yeah,
times people lose sight of that, where it's like a college is supposed to be like learning new things and challenging ideas and exchanging ideas, and not just like here's my opinion, which is the true thing, or here's my opinion, which is fact, or here's the one side. I'm not going to tell you the other side, or if I do, I'm going to portray it as like stupid. So here you go. Like I think that yeah, it's supposed to be like that, like back and forth, challenging ideas. But I always feel like I think they interpret challenging ideas as in like I'm going to challenge your ideas with left wing ideas, and it's always that like it's like I'm going to challenge your view of the environment because you probably hate the environment, and so I'm going to challenge your opinion with a very left leaning like Green New Deal view of the environment. I'm like, well, that's not really challenge. You're not really. Yes, you're challenging my ideas, but you're not challenging your ideas or like anyone who already agrees with these ideas. Like it's often very one sided challenging of ideas. It's not like a back and forth challenging because you're supposed to challenge both sides, not just this side is going to challenge this side.
right.
So I think that's something I don't know. Like I think that'd be a whole that'd probably be a topic for another day. But yeah, that's just a little something to touch on a little bit. But one thing I want to talk about before we go is just because I mostly want to talk about this because I've been like reading some stuff lately. But have you been like reading anything or seen any movies or shows or anything where there's some kind of like political stuff or like some good takeaways or interesting things that you learned from it that you wanted to bring up, like anything kind of relevant for yeah.
So I actually started reading Frontlines by Isabel Brown. I haven't actually like read too much of it, but I know that she goes into her personal experiences of being a conservative, a Gen Z conservative on a college campus, and like her experiences with like the faculty and like the college as a whole. So I'm actually really interested in like reading more into that, and I'll probably like update the podcast later. But I did watch No Safe Spaces, which is a documentary by PragerU and like Dennis Prager and like all of them. And it discusses like the college climate for conservatives or like conservative professors or students and how they're treated and or abused on certain college campuses. Um, I feel like that's like so relevant because we're lucky we go to a Catholic school, so it's a little bit more like traditionally inclined, even though it is a liberal campus. But there's a lot of like schools in which conservatives really aren't welcome. Like you saw like a few years ago, I think it was 2017, UC Berkeley was like literally burning down like to the ground. And like it's just really interesting how like certain certain states or certain campuses will be more or less accepting or tolerant of opposing views. So it's just really interesting to think about in comparison to our own experiences.
Yeah, totally. That's I think I've definitely heard of that documentary. I think I definitely heard about that when it was coming out. But I think it'd be kind of interesting to talk about yeah, we could definitely talk about like stuff like that more probably on the next podcast, or even like just PragerU in general, because I feel like PragerU always gets like a bad rap where they're like everyone who's like not on the right's always like, oh, PragerU, like their videos, they're just like a worthless, like they just like they do the whole like, oh, own the libs, like own the left, like they kind of get memed a lot, and I feel like they get kind of a bad rap. But yeah, it's like it'd be interesting to talk about them, and I like that safe spaces thing. I might have to check that out myself, but yeah, like I still remember the Berkeley Ben Shapiro thing, and it's it's always you get that a lot where like there's all these like open well Berkeley's I think they're kind of in a zone of their own, like they're kind of like the extreme example of that kind of thing, but I think that definitely like there's like whenever we say like, oh, conservatives aren't welcome on campus, like everyone's like, oh no, like what are you saying? Like there's nothing against it. Like yeah, there's no rules or like laws against conservatives on campus or anything like that. But it's not like just it's very very rarely going to be just like in like the student code of conduct or like in like the laws or in the university's like mission statement they just say we do not allow conservatives. Like that's not what happens. It's never like a overt like you're not welcome here kind of thing. But it's like kind of like at Berkeley like shutting to like or just in colleges in general, just like shutting down conservative speaker events, targeting like YAF chapters, College Republican chapters, TPUSA chapters. Like it's a lot of this kind of just like it's not overt. Like like I think whenever we say like oh conservatives aren't welcome, people are expecting like they think that we believe there's something written down somewhere that says that we can't do all this stuff, but it's a lot more subtle and like a lot more not like subtle like it's not official. It's an unofficial kind of like unspoken rule more or less. So yeah, I'll have to check that out. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime for
Oh,
free right now.
perfect. I have Amazon Prime.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, one of the things because actually the reason I kind of wanted to include this question is because I recently read 1984 and like I have no one else to talk with this about because like I don't have a lot of I don't really talk politics with my friends. But 1984 was a really good book. Like I know everyone, I feel like there's always that thing where it's like, oh, like you haven't even read George Orwell, you can't make any 1984 references. But now I have read it, so now I can make 1984 references, and it's a really good book. Yeah, like it's not even just like a, not just even just for politics. Like it's a very interesting like political like oh this is like what like totalitarianism or like socialism or fascism can lead to. But it's like it's just like it's a good story. And it's really interesting about just how like the crushing of the human spirit and like what it mean like just completely like what it means to manipulate information. Like I think that's the biggest thing in the book is just the manipulation of information and facts and language and like controlling that. And so that's why I think it's really important, like especially nowadays with the media, just like the controlling information. I think is incredibly like powerful and very dangerous because like if you actually read 1984, like I don't know how much you know about the actual like lore behind it, but or anyone listening to this knows, but they control information to such an extent where the government, like Big Brother, INCSOC, whatever you want to call them, is they can literally say so. There's like the three big countries: Oceania, East Asia, Eurasia. So Oceania is at war with East Asia, but then the next day they can say, "Oh no, we're actually at war with Eurasia. We were actually allied with East Asia," and everyone just believes it. Like it, they don't even question. Like every single document is changed to match that narrative. Literally everything is shifted to match that. Everyone just believes it. They don't even question it. You never like in your own head. You don't even think, wait, that wasn't true. They think, oh yeah, like that's true. Like it was always like that. Like it's such a interesting. Like the world building in that book's really amazing. Like I'm a huge fan of that book. I like it a lot. But yeah, a scary book indeed. Not a happy ending either. But
Ooh.
it's it's a it's a really cool book. And yeah, I'm just now I can actually make 1984 references. And also, I think it's interesting to talk about like in terms of politics. I feel like everyone gets really defensive about it. Where like I feel like 1984 is kind of thrown at everybody. Where like whenever anyone talks about like any kind of like government thing, everyone just throws it at them. Like they're like, oh, it's just like 1984, and it's a lot of times it's not. But like it's I think it's the spirit and the sentiment behind it, like just controlling the narrative, controlling information, expansion of government. Also, they do touch on it a bit, like how INGSOC. It's like I don't know how much again I don't know how much you know about the book. Like INGSOC is actually a slur or it's an abbreviation of like English socialism, kind of like how Nazi is a abbreviation for National Socialist German Workers Party. They shortened it to Nazi. English socialism shortened to just INGSOC. So like it's very anti-social, but it's not just anti-social. It's just like I want to be like, oh, it's such a epic right wing book that like is so like anti communist. Like it's just anti totalitarian. Like totalitarianism in general is bad. Like that's just what the book's about. It's not just fascism, just communism, just socialism. Like it's just big government totalitarianism in general is bad. And that's why I think it's a very good book for any not even just conservatives, like anyone who doesn't like big government, I think is it's a good book.
Yeah, I actually have owned that book for like quite a few years and I still have yet to read it. But now I really want to read it, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, I have a ton of books too that I haven't read, but like for Lent, what I've been trying to do is like just read more because I figured out with 1984 is that if you actually just sit down for like an hour or two a day and just read, you can actually get through books pretty quickly. And so I used to actually like really not like reading. I think it might have been because of school, and they make you read all these books I don't really care about. And I
Yeah.
thought I thought I hated like storybooks. Like I could still read philosophy books because I was weird, and I was like, oh, I love philosophy, but I don't want to read like Harry Potter. But now, for whatever reason, it's like I think with 1984, I realized again, like, oh, like I don't hate storybooks. It's just that I was not reading like storybooks that I was interested in or that I liked. And so when you actually sit down and just read for like an hour or two, you get a lot done. You can go through some books. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. It's like I'm already like I finished 1984. I'm already like 3/4 of the way done with Dan Crenshaw's book Fortitude. And so like if you actually just dedicate some time, it's kind of amazing how much you can read through. Because I think that's just my biggest thing is I need to actually just sit down and just commit time to it. And I would recommend everyone out go out there and do the same because like there's a lot of cool stuff in books, and I have a lot of books that I haven't read, and it feels good just to go through them and learn some stuff.
Exactly. And like it's not just like political books that you necessarily have to read. You
Mm-hmm.
can read like fiction because I enjoy a good fiction fantasy book. Also like personal development, those are super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, reading's super important and I need to actually go do that again too.
Yeah,
So
like there's a lot of books where I feel like I should. This is in like movies, like well, because I'm a film major, so I feel like if I haven't seen like every classic movie, I'm somehow failing because it's like, oh, you're a film major and you haven't seen like Harry Potter or what, like kind of that thing. It's like with books, I feel like it's kind of a similar thing where I almost feel like a part of me just wants to read because I feel like oh, like I feel bad just not reading. Like I feel like that's kind of something because like no one wants to admit like oh yeah, I just don't read books. Like that seems kind of like a bad thing. So part of me kind of just started reading because I was like, I feel bad having all these books I haven't read. But then when you actually start doing it, you actually like you get a lot out of it. I think there's a lot to learn from that.
definitely.
Well, unless you had any of the last things to mention, I think we're just about done because we've covered a lot of topics and we're a little bit over an hour now, so I don't want to get go on too long.
Awesome. Well, for everyone who's listening, you should like, comment, subscribe, and follow our Instagram. And I think we have a Facebook page.
Maybe.
Not super active. We're more active on Instagram, so if anyone
Yeah.
wants to follow that, please do.
Yeah, totally. And hopefully we'll be back in like another week or two, and we'll see you all then.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.